Hello and welcome to episode 55 of The Thing About Golf, a podcast series from Golf Australia magazine exploring that intriguing question, just what is it that so captures people about this game? Rod Murray's my name, and alongside my colleague John Huggan, we have the great privilege of putting this question to people from all corners of the golf world, from the obvious, like players and administrators, to those with less of a profile, from the worlds of architecture and writing and other various industries. Today's episode is a cracking chat between a couple of old friends, one of them being John Huggan, who joins me now. Huggy, how long have you known today's guest, Peter McEvoy? And give the listeners a quick thumbnail sketch of his resume in the game. Not a household name, but a very influential character.
Yeah, Peter McEvoy, I've known him for more than 4 decades. He was a mainstay in the England amateur team when I remarkably made my way into the Scottish team briefly in the early 80s. Before that, he'd won the British Amateur, if I can call it that, twice. Played in the Walker Cup umpteen times. He went on to captain the Walker Cup team, chairman of the selection committee. He's done pretty much everything you can do in amateur golf. He won the individual at the Eisenhower Trophy, the World Amateur Team. Hell of a player. He was very close to the lead in the 1979 Open at Lytham with about 7 or 8 holes to go until he realised he was one shot off the lead in the Open with 7 or 8 holes to go. Yeah, yes. But had he turned pro, he would certainly have won tournaments on the European Tour, and he might even have scraped into a Ryder Cup team before he was done.
A legitimately and seriously good player. Huggy, he sounds like everything that you should automatically be not attracted to. He's English. Scots and England are like cats and dogs. He's an establishment guy. He's been a selector. He's been a part of a lot. He's the sort that you would normally be poking fun at for sitting in the R&A clubhouse with dandruff falling out of his hair onto his blue coat, isn't he?
Well, no. Well, yeah, on paper, perhaps, but he's exactly the opposite of that in real life. He was kind of a member of the establishment who was anti-establishment, and he's not actually English, sort of. He was brought up in Scotland. He's got a kind of still got a bit of a Scottish accent, a little bit anyway. Supports Scotland in most things except golf, but he should have played for Scotland at golf. I've told him that many times, but he became the kind of marked man playing for England. He had a very, very long unbeaten record in singles playing for England at amateur level. And I've given him some grief, and I think it's mentioned in the podcast. He did a book back in the day, and I didn't get a mention in the book because I was the last person that he beat while he was unbeaten.
so you're like the husband who loosens the jar lid for the wife, aren't you? You give it the first, and then from that point on, now he can be beaten. So
it's an incredible claim to fame, really. But yeah.
I was beaten by a bloke who then went on to get beaten by somebody else.
Well, he lost the very next day to Ronan Rafferty. That was the
there you go, which he talked about. And funnily enough, when he tells that story, it's fantastic. And I was going to mention this. He's the first guest we've ever had, Huggy, who's managed to get a mention of Dick Emery into the podcast.
Yeah.
And for that, I'm eternally grateful. Wonderful effort on his part. Last thing, Huggy, he is particularly interesting, and I encourage people to really listen up when he talks about teams and team dynamics. He really shone in this way, didn't he? Both as a player and as a captain and as a selector.
Yeah, he had very firm views on most things, which didn't make him that popular when he was a player with the selectors, but he certainly knew what he was about. He captained the Walker Cup team in 2001 when they won at Sea Island. He had Luke Donald, and he was captain at Nairn 2 years before that when Donald played, and Paul Casey were the stars of that team. So but the best thing he ever did as a England amateur team captain was pair Luke Donald with a guy called Robert Duck. So they had Donald playing with Duck, which you have to do, really. You just can't miss an opportunity like that.
Look, we were still talking about him because he did it. We'd still be talking about him if he didn't as well. Because you're right, that's an opportunity that doesn't come along too often. It's a fabulous chat. I'm sure you enjoyed it, Huggy, and it achieves one of the things this podcast sets out to do, as I said, not a household name, Peter McEvoy, but a fabulous bit of oral history to be in the archives for people to listen to in 50 and 100 years' time and really get some great insight into the game. So well done to you, well done to Peter McEvoy, and let's get on with it. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
Okay, Peter McEvoy, thank you for joining me on the Thing About Golf podcast. I always start with the same question. What was the thing about golf for you?
What was the thing about golf? Well, it's not so much what was the thing about golf for me, really. It's what's the thing about golf. I just think there's such an obsession with pro golf, you know. And I don't think that's the thing about golf. I think the thing about golf is people playing it. You know, people just having good fun playing it. You know, the game would still survive if there was no pro golf. But, you know, everybody, you know, 99.9% of what you read is all about...
I plead guilty to that.
Yeah, well, absolutely. You know, but, you know, I understand that the pro game has to stimulate interest and it's an important part of the game, but it's not the thing about golf.
Well, how did you get into it then? I mean, did you start off just by whacking a ball around a field, or did you keep score? Or, I mean, how competitive were you starting off? Because I know you were, despite your playing for England, which is a source of some, you know, pain for me in the past, you're really Scottish.
Yeah, I mean, my introduction to golf was the classic way. My dad played. He was quite a good player, down to sort of 4 handicap. And around Greenock and Gourock Golf Club, he was a GP there. And I used to follow him around, caddy for him, follow him around. Then he bought me some cut-down clubs. Used to hit balls, then went up to Gourock Golf Club and... played with 2 friends, 4 holes used to play, but I'd never played 18 holes till I was 14 years of age. When we moved to England at that point, and then I wasn't. I was playing other sports as well. I wasn't really, you know, any kind of protege by any means compared to what you see nowadays.
I was going to ask that. I mean, when did it become apparent that there was some talent there? I mean, were you even aware of it? It sounds like you weren't.
Well, I knew I was quite good at it because I was good at other sports, and I thought, you know, sports are all the same. And I knew I was quite good at it. I just hadn't really given any mind to it. I mean, my first competition, the first time I ever remember playing a competition, and I was playing off 36, and I went round in 84 for a net 48, and only won by a shot.
Really?
Yeah. So, and that got me very interested.
Yeah.
And then at age 16, I won the Warwickshire Boys Championship, and I thought that I'd made it at that point. I mean, I thought that was, and I was never. I've never been more nervous than playing in that.
Right.
I've played in Opens and Masters and Walker Cups and stuff like that, but I've never been more nervous than that.
But what was the attraction for that at that stage? Was it the competitive aspect of it, or was it just the joy of hitting the ball properly?
Oh, well, I think golf's a fantastic game in that you're only trying to improve on your own best performance previously, you know. So I think that was what I really enjoyed. It was the fact that you're getting better, and you can measure it, you know, by your scores and stuff like that. I think that's one of the most attractive things. The flip side of that is, as you get older, you can measure your deterioration, you know, which that's the stage I'm at now.
Yeah, exactly. Me too. Yeah. And where did it take you? I mean, Warwickshire Boys. I mean, you know, okay, Warwickshire Boys is nice, but plenty of people have won the Warwickshire Boys, I'm sure, and disappeared into the ether.
Yes, I know, but it was the stimulus. It was the thing that made me want to play more. And then I looked at, you get in the Warwickshire boys team and you look at the Warwickshire men's team and you think they're gods, you know. And then you get in the Warwickshire men's team and realise actually that they're rubbish. And you look at the England men's team and you think they're gods. And then you get in the England men's team and you realise they're rubbish. Even actually when you get to play in an Open, and you play with some of the more journeyman-y pros, you realise they're rubbish as well. You know, relatively rubbish. Yeah. They're absolutely not what you thought at all.
No.
Until you get to the very, very top, and then you realise they're very good. You know?
Well, I went, you know, not as far up at the tree as you did, but I was always surprised that I was even able to play. You know, initially, until I got used to it, and then you moved up and on to the next level or whatever. You know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the thing that I really noticed, is every time I got up the next notch, it wasn't what I thought it would be. It wasn't anything like as good. I think the standard wasn't anything like. You always felt like you were a slight sort of interloper, you know, that you shouldn't really be there, you know. But then you do scores that are competitive, and therefore you should be there.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to get to this question sooner or later, so I'm going to ask it, you know, sooner rather than later. Why did you turn pro? Because you were clearly good enough. I mean, and if you were coming along now, you would turn pro.
Oh, definitely. I would definitely turn pro now because, but the truth is, I mean, the nearest I got to it was I came 17th in the Open in 1979, but I was better. I'd done better than that. I was fourth with 4 holes to go, so it was not with 8 holes to go rather. So I was in the mix, and that year I'd won the amateur the 2 previous years. I'd won the Lytham Trophy and things, and made the cut in the Masters that year. So, I felt like nowadays, if you won 2 successive amateur championships, came 17th in the Open and made the cut in the Masters, somebody would give you £1 million to turn pro. Somebody would give you £1 million to turn pro.
Yeah.
But nobody offered me anything. And it coincided with my law exams later on in the year, and I thought, look, I've done so much of that, I better finish that, and then the moment had gone.
Yeah. Well, what was your thinking, though? I mean, did you think, well, I'm going to sit in the lawyer's office for the rest of my days?
No, I never wanted to be a solicitor. I only did that to appease my father so that I could play golf, really.
Right.
But I did quite fancy you just look back and you realise how naive you were. I quite fancied being like Mark McCormack. I thought that seemed like quite a nice thing to do. So when I finished my articles, I set up a company and got a few clients. Gordon Brand Jr., for example. Goodish players, and did a deal with Vinnie Giles out in the States and sort of half represented his clients over here, but I was absolutely terrible at it. I mean,
what were you lacking?
Oh, just rubbish. I was just so bad at it. I don't think I was sufficiently starstruck.
Right.
Mainly because, like I say, I mean, I'd actually played with these people, and I knew they weren't all that cracked up to be, really. I mean, good players as they were, but, I didn't see them as sort of demigods, and as a consequence I just hadn't got the passion or the drive, and I really was very poor at it. So that didn't last very long.
You dabbled in the women's game as well, did you?
I did. That was actually a bit more fun, though. That was right at the outset of the women's game. It was the WPGA, which now become the LET, but that was quite good because that was pioneering stuff, and I went out to the States to the LPGA qualifying school and basically took the best players that just missed their card,
right,
brought them back out as sponsor, brought them back, and they formed a team, and that became an integral part of the WPGA. In fact, at one point, I remember, because I was still negotiating with the sponsor to do it again for another year, and the very existence of the WPGA depended on them coming over. So I was, quite an important cog in the wheel at that time.
Yeah, it was pretty small beer, though, wasn't it? I mean,
it was. It wasn't. I mean, look, you were never going to make a fortune out of it. But nonetheless, it was quite, like any pioneering stuff, it's quite interesting,
Mm-hmm.
And the standard there was not good at all at that time. The women's game now, the standard's very high, but in those days it really wasn't.
Yeah, there was no depth to it for a long time.
Not at all, no.
Yeah. I'm interested in the psychology of that. I mean, you're sort of delving into the lower reaches of the pro game, having been at the very top of the amateur game. How was part of that you looked at it and thought, I can't be bothered with this?
Well, it was more. I mean, once I'd naively tried to become Mark McCormack again, I then realised how the game worked, and I could see that the pro side of the game was very well looked after. I mean, not like it is nowadays, but there were big companies like IMG particularly who were dominating it, and very naive to think you could compete. Really, you could go and work for them, but to compete against them would be nice. But the grassroots of the game was ignored. And so I then got involved in sponsorships in the grassroots of the game. So the kind of thing where there'd be a sponsor, clubs would play in a qualifying event, the winner would go through to regional finals and then through to national finals and international finals.
It was a Ford thing, was it? It was Ford?
Well, yeah, there were a number of them, and I did that for about 10 years because nobody else was doing it.
Right.
And actually, sponsors and companies were very interested, just in the time when people were wanting to get databases together. This was these were pieces of paper rather than electronic. But, we used to get paid by the number of pieces of paper with people's details on them.
Right.
So it was the very early days of direct marketing, really. And so we did it for a lot of car companies, a lot of big companies, and did that quite happily for 10 years. And that's why I got very involved in the grassroots of the game with handicap golfers, senior golfers, all kinds of things. And I liked that because
it makes sense because there's far more of them than there are pros.
There are millions of them.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed that. That was, because I like the grassroots of the game. It's like when you ask, I can't remember your question was, what's golf about? Or
what's the thing about golf?
What's the thing about golf? That the grassroots of the game attracts me.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the idea now, especially of going out and just whacking the ball around and not keeping score.
Yeah.
The score means nothing to me.
That's because of the scores you do.
Well, that's part of it. There's certainly an ego aspect to it because I play so badly now. But but really, keeping score, people shouldn't keep score.
A lot of people don't. That's one thing I've learned is, so much of the game is structured around handicaps and competitions and new handicap schemes and that kind of thing. There's an enormous number of people who don't want to do any of that. Yeah. All they want to do is go out for a walk and play 9 holes and that's it. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with it.
No.
It's
that's me now.
Yeah, well, it's a big part of the game. There's loads of people like that. It's hard to harness those people though, because if you're trying to develop them, not that why should you develop them anyway? But if you are trying to, it's pretty hard to do it.
Well, they're just kind of touching the edges of the game, aren't they? That's hard to draw them further in.
Yeah.
I would think.
But there's been big quests to try to get at the clubless golfer and try to get them organised, but they don't want to be organised particularly.
No,
they just like it the way it is.
Anyway, I've jumped you ahead a bit here. I wanted to talk a bit about your, playing for England and Walker Cups and all the rest of it. You had an extraordinary long run of unbeaten playing singles for England.
I did. I think I lost the first game I lost was my 28th game singles.
Yeah. Well, and I have to mention, of course, that my claim to fame in the midst of all this is that I was the last person you beat while you were unbeaten.
That's right. Yes.
Which didn't rate a mention in your book. I was very disappointed.
Sorry about that. But it's I lost to Ronan Rafferty then.
Yeah.
The next day probably.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
I was I was struggling with my golf at that time. And I remember I got on the last green and I had a 15-footer to tie, to keep my record. Yeah. And I left it short. And I had somebody saying, I'm really surprised you left that short. And they didn't realise I actually had no control over this, where I was hitting it at the time. And my putting had got so bad that...
Well, that certainly explains how I managed to take you to the last green the day before. So.
Yes, maybe so. But... No, so I had a good, and I kept going. I was very successful as an international golfer. My overall record, and it shows you're a bit of a self-obsessed person if you keep these records. But it was 78% in the end, and that's across.
That is extraordinary at that level.
That's England, Walker Cups, and Andrews Trophy. English universities, even, that's everything, but it was 78%. So, and my singles is just over 80. So, and I can't really explain why that was, because I did beat a lot of people who were better than me.
For example.
Come
on, but, steady.
Ola Thabel, 3 times. Darren Clark. Robert Carlson, Per Johansson, Gordon Brand, Ronan Rafferty. I lost to him once, but I beat him the next time I played him. People who were, Nick Faldo, Sandy Lal in different contexts, but, there were all those players were better than I was. And, but I managed to con them into thinking I was better than them. I don't know.
Well, that was funny you should say that, because I remember sitting down after we played and thinking, because you were always the guy that everybody in the Scottish team wanted to play, because you'd had this long run and everybody wanted to be the guy to break it, obviously. Yeah. And I remember thinking, God, if I'd just been a couple of shots better. And a few seconds later, I thought, well, he probably still would have beaten me on the last green. You had that kind of match play aura, if you like.
I cared an awful lot. probably more than most. I think that's the only thing I can really put it down to, why I would. And I was, undisguisedly the kind of person who, I would rather win my match than the team lose. It sounds like a terrible thing, especially as you went on to be captain.
Yeah.
But it was true. I just wanted my game. I don't think it made me a bad team man, because once I'd won, I was then very into the team and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But if you gave me the choice, you can win and the team lose, or you lose and the team win, I'd take my win every time.
I think that's just incredibly honest, because there is so much guff talked about how, it's the team. You see them at the Ryder Cup recently, they're all talking about how, I don't care if I go 0 for 5 if the team wins. What absolute nonsense.
And I just don't believe them.
No, neither do I.
And when I became captain, I wanted a load of people who just wanted to win their own point. You read so much about team spirit, and you read with the Ryder Cup, I think team spirit, you always have. I've never been in a team that didn't have team spirit. You always have it, especially if it's a national thing, or European tour as an entity thing.
Yeah.
But you've always got team spirit. That's expected. That's not the issue. To me, the issue is level of expectation. That's what makes teams successful. And that was the. Going on to Walker Cup now. I don't know, jumping around a bit.
No,
when I first became Walker Cup captain, our record. I can't remember it exactly, but it was something like played 33, lost 31, won 2. It was just awful, and our expectation level was on the floor. We couldn't have. You'd go into Walker Cup matches, and I'd played 5 and won 1. But in the 4 that we lost, I'd always expected, when we finished the match, we always used to get together and go, God, if we only knew how ordinary they were, we'd have approached that in a totally different way. And that always stuck with me.
And they always seem to win the holes at the end.
Yeah, but again, it's expectation. You can actually prove it. If you look at any league table in any sport in the world, and you look at home and away, you'll find that 2/3 of matches are won at home and 1/3 are won away. So you have twice the chance of winning at home as you have away. That's in the same normal rectangle of grass. Normally, it might be a tennis court or whatever it might be. Same rectangle of grass against the same people. You've got twice the chance of winning in one as you have in the other. Now, there are certain things, like you might get a bit of hometown refereeing and stuff like that. But nonetheless, that's an enormous change. And that's because when you play at home, you expect to win. And when you play away, you expect to lose. And if you can change that mindset, you can change everything.
Well, you were captain Walker Cup first time in '99, and you won it in Nairn.
Yeah.
So did that change the expectations going into the next one?
No, yes, it did. But I had to change to win at Nairn first. I went to, the first thing I did was went to Saatchi & Saatchi, big advertising agency, and got a video done, because we had a really good team. We had a really good team, and I just wanted them all to know they had a really good team. And I think, we were better than them, which does help them winning.
I remember watching Donald and Casey playing together in that match, and I remember thinking they could play in the Ryder Cup now.
No,
they were that good.
We had a very strong team, but we just had to believe it, because we'd had strong teams before and lost. Of course, once you win one, it's easier to win the next one because the expectation. And we won the next one as well, and then we won that one after that, and actually should have won the one in Chicago after that. We should have won 4 in a row. But
was that the one where you didn't pick Rory?
Yes. Yeah, that wasn't my greatest selectorial moment.
No.
But in mitigation, we got down to last place. We should have, on reflection, we should have picked him first. But we got down to last. The trouble is, Rory at that age, 16, he'd not entered hardly any amateur tournaments, and he'd entered loads of pro tournaments, and he missed the cut in every one of them.
Yeah.
His stroke average was 79,
but
we still knew. And I remember getting to the end of it, and I was chairman, selectors, and we hadn't picked him, and I thought, and I said, look, do you think we ought to reconsider this? Because I just think we might be missing a
Well, who did it come down to, him or who else?
Brian McElhenney.
Right.
Brian McElhenney. Now, Brian McElhenney...
He was a good match player, I remember.
Brian McElhenney was the amateur champion, and his international record was played 14, won 14, or something like that.
Why was he so far down the list then?
Because of all the rest of his record, really. Right. But it became down to the two of them. We'd already picked a 16-year-old in Oliver Fisher, who'd come second, third, second, first, second, so he was straight in. But it was very hard to leave McElhenney out, given, that he was amateur champion and had such a fantastic record. But the terrible thing about it was we picked the team, and then the Open was quite soon afterwards, and I went to the AGW dinner, and that day Rory had gone round Portrush in 61, and the Irish table were sitting next to where I was sitting, and giving me a bit of a hard time. But as I said to them, if I'd known he was going round in 61, we'd have picked him. But it wasn't a great moment, and if we had picked Rory, we would have won.
Who were the best that you saw and played against as amateurs?
As amateurs, funnily enough, not always gone on to be great players. They flickered often. Robert Gamez.
Yeah, I remember him.
Robert Gamez.
He played at Peachtree.
He played at Peachtree, turned pro, won, I think, pretty early on.
He won Bay Hill, remember, holding the second shot on the last.
I think he won twice, almost in his first year, and then disappeared off the face of the earth. Oh God, I'm trying to remember his name now. I mean, that's how Gary Holberg.
Oh yeah.
Gary Holberg in 77 was outstandingly their best player.
Yeah.
He did okay as a senior.
He won 2 or 3 times, I think. Yeah. But he didn't turn out to be the superstar.
No, but I mean, he really did look like he would be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there weren't always, I remember Scott Hoke being very good at Muirfield.
Yeah.
I remember
Sigel was always good.
Yeah, in a different way.
Was he ever the best player? He was maybe the second or third best player in every team.
That's about right. But I don't think Jay Sigel was necessarily all that gifted a golfer. I thought he was got the most out of everything that he could. But it wasn't always the best players in the team weren't the superstars, though. I mean, Mickelson looked like he was going to be good, but he was by no means the best player in their team in '89. Gamez was much better.
Yeah.
But
what about the GB&I team? Sandy Lyle must come to mind, surely.
Yeah. Sandy would have been. I can't think of anybody that was better than Sandy. I mean, I thought Rafferty was very good too, but again, he fell away a bit.
Yeah, he didn't.
Strangely,
it didn't last that long. I mean, he went to number 1 in Europe, played in the Ryder Cup, and then he was gone.
Strange, because he was gifted. It's not, it wasn't. He was always sort of swimming uphill a bit.
He caused a lot of bother behind the scenes, didn't he, with the Irish Joe Carr, and he fell out, I remember.
Yeah. Well, that was I remember that very well, because I played him. And we did a really good game. And Joe turned up on the 17th tee, and Ronan, I think, was one up.
This is at St Andrews, is it?
St Andrews, yeah, sorry. This would have been the quarters or the semis of the European Team Championship. And Joe Carr turned up on the 17th tee. Rory, I think, was one up. But we were well under par. We were both playing well. And Rory was showing off a bit, because that was the nature of him, trying to hit it across the tail, and left it right and knocked it out of bounds. Right. And I eventually won on the 19th. And Joe misinterpreted it altogether. But he was a big lad in those days, Ronan.
Ronan. Yeah.
And he couldn't fit into his team green trousers.
Right.
So he'd played in black trousers, and Joe misinterpreted everything and thought, this bloke's not trying, he's not even wearing the uniform, he's trying to hit it across the corner of the hotel. So he dropped him for the rest of the tournament.
I remember that,
and made him wear the green trousers, which he definitely couldn't fit into. And I was saying, he was quite a big lad in those days. So he walked about like, do you remember Dick Emery walking about?
Yes, yeah.
He walked about like that for 2 days, just watching the games.
Yeah, you are awful, but I love you, sort of thing. Right. Yes. Yeah. So anybody else come to mind?
again, it's amazing the number of really good players who were the best players at the time, who then don't come to anything. Owen O'Connell.
Yeah.
Owen O'Connell, 1989, I would say was the best amateur in the world. He played in the US Amateur after we won at Peachtree and was the medalist, so he led after the 36-hole qualifying. Turned pro shortly after that, top 10 in his first 3 tournaments, which didn't surprise me at all. I thought he was going to go on to be a real, major winner type player. A year later, was almost not playing the game. It's amazing how these things happen.
Well, they fall out in love with it. I mean...
Well, they changed technique. I remember seeing Owen had a bit of a Eamon Darcy sort of approach to the game. You know, there was a bit of fiddling going on at the top of the swing. And I saw him about 2 years after he turned pro on a practice ground, and he just cut that bit out of his swing. So he now had a short, no flailing at the top at all. And he was nothing, he couldn't
The Irish are famous for that. I mean, from Jimmy Bruin sort of onwards.
Yeah, well, he was one of them, but God, he was really gifted. And he's somebody I thought would go on and do really well.
Well, on the other side of the coin then, who surprised you how well they've done as a pro?
Colin Montgomery, I would say.
Why do you say that? Because I always tell the story about playing the practice round with him at the '84 Amateur at Formby, which he then subsequently got to the final and lost to Lathabal. Now, at the end of '83, he wasn't in the Scotland team for the Home International, so he wasn't in the top 11 in Scotland at the end of '83, and he came back 9 months later, June '84, and I played a practice round. Colin Dalglish was playing as well. And I remember turning to Colin Dalglish after about 4 holes and saying, "Have you noticed anything?" And he goes, "Yeah." He says, "This guy's incredible." And he was probably 21 at that point.
Yeah.
It was an extraordinary difference.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure what happened.
Well, he'd have played in... I played an Eisner Trophy with him in '84. I got in the quarters of that Formby one, so I think I was due to play Colin in the semis until I lost.
But he was by the Home Internationals in '84 at Troon.
Yeah,
he was the best player in all 4 teams.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I think Colin had great strengths. But I remember him out in Hong Kong in the Eisenhower Trophy, and this was still the days of steel and wood. It would still be steel and wood, wouldn't it? And he had everything bar a bit of length, because everything was left to right. Mm-hmm. And with steel and wood, it came off differently to the way it does.
He certainly used every technological he could.
Yeah, and so it wasn't that he hadn't got he had obvious determination and course management skills and all the things that really matter, but just lacked 20, 30 yards of length probably. He was well behind everybody else. Right. And then metal woods came in, and that makes up that difference. Yeah. And he still had all the other qualities. But to go on and win whatever it was, 7 or 8 orders of merit, I would never have predicted that.
No. What do you make of him as a person? I mean, there was a lot of inverse snobbery going on in the Scottish teams at the time. I mean, I played alongside him once and played a lot of practice rounds with him, and he was posh. He was a posh Scot, and he was brought up in England, basically. I mean, he was born in Scotland, but he came from
remember
Leeds.
him as being a Yorkshireman.
Yeah.
That's when I first came across him. He was playing at, I can't remember, somewhere in Yorkshire.
But a lot of people made fun of him. That was my point. Yeah, and he stuck in there and proved them all wrong.
I think Colin off the golf course, away from the golf course, is very nice, very good company, very affable. But he's got a trigger. I mean, he it's part of him wanting to be such a good player. He doesn't like any kind of disappointment on the golf course at all, and that colours everybody's view of him, really. Yeah. And he was a bit stroppy. I mean, he could get very stroppy on the golf course.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen him treat people really badly, but again, I've seen the other side of him as well. Before he and I stopped talking to each other in the wake of Indonesia, we had dinner a couple of times a year on the tour, and the deal was nothing left the table.
Yeah.
I get all his gossip and he'd get all mine, and off he went.
No, he's, very good companion and things like that. And I used to room with him occasionally, as you probably have as well. Very good companion, But he whinged about his putting, but God, I thought he was a great putter,
Yeah.
And he'd made himself a great putter. I remember him having to hole, I can't remember how many putts it was, from 4 feet in a row before he could go to bed type thing. And he would mean it, and he would do it,
Anybody else that sticks out in that? What about Gary Wilsonholm? He's an intriguing figure to me, because he's the same age as me, and I was long done before he'd even started, and yet he went on to have this great amateur career.
Yeah, well, so it was actually not that dissimilar to Colin, really. Very short. I remember playing him in a county match in Leicestershire, and he was so short he couldn't even have considered him for international golf at that point. And then Metalwoods came along, and again he had everything else, and incredibly determined. But he's a bit more complex than Colin. He's quite a strange chap in some ways.
I'm so shocked to hear that.
But it's strange in the way that he would play in a World Cup match and beat Anthony Kim, who was one of the best players in the American team at the time. Again, somebody who's disappeared. But he'd beat him, and then the next morning or after the match, he'd be very subdued, Gary, off, by himself, as though he'd been trounced, And then he'll get trounced by somebody, and he's everybody's pal. He was very difficult to relate to, but my God, if ever there was anybody that wanted his point, it was him. So I'd have Gary in all my teams. He was, he never let you down.
Yeah.
Never intimidated, because all his life he'd been miles behind everybody off the tee, and so he's never intimidated.
Now you've, over the course of your long career, you've seen both sides of the selectorial, equation, if you like. You've been picked for God knows how many teams, but you were also left out, very controversially, the one Walker Cup team. How did all that impact on your attitude to being a selector or a captain later on? How did that affect your thinking?
Well, it certainly affected my thinking as a player. Because it really motivated me. I was treading water a bit. Garth McGimpsey and myself were both left out of that team.
This is 1987
Walker Cup, yeah. And we were both left out of the team. And I genuinely, to this day, would say we were a number 1 and 2 player in the country, in the UK, or GB&I, actually. So it wasn't right at all. But it motivated me. It made me go out and practice and diet and, work really hard. Mm-hmm. And so that was 87, wasn't it? So in 88, I won the individual and the world championships. Which I'd not done before, So it made me a better player without any question.
Yeah.
I got in the final in 87 at Prestwick.
Yeah.
And I was ready, I was playing Paul Mayo, who, with respect to Paul, I would normally beat.
Decent player, but not as good as you.
I would normally beat, and I did outplay him to lose 3-1. But I outplayed him the whole day. I should have won, but I didn't. But I'd got a speech ready, and I was going to absolutely assassinate the selectors because it was perfect, because it was only the week after the World Cup being played, and I'd then win the amateur championship. Would have been fantastic. But then, of course, I lost, and nobody wanted to talk to me, so I never actually made the speech, which probably was no bad
thing. Can you give us a flavour of what?
Well, it was only really that I just felt it was wrong. I just felt it was wrong. I was going to do it on behalf of Garth.
You were going to sign it bitter and twisted, were you?
I was going to do it on behalf of Garth, which was fair enough to him. Garth definitely should not have been left out. Anyway, we all came back for the following one, and we won. For 89, which we might not have done if we hadn't been left out. So, but I don't think the selectors were necessarily leaving us out for our own benefit in order for us to improve our game.
Is it right that certainly my impression of it is that when you're picking a team, you're really only picking the last 2 or 3 guys?
Usually, yeah. Usually. Although there was only one match where I remember that not quite being the case, and that was at Ganton in 2003.
Yeah.
And we were picking from extreme weakness. We really hadn't got the Caseys and Donalds and McDowells and Dysons and people. We hadn't got anybody that was of that class.
Collie Wilson was in that team.
He was the best.
But he was struggling that week, I remember.
Yeah, but he was the best player in the team.
Yeah.
And he's gone on to do okay, but, nothing like the others, So we really hadn't got strength. We were playing on a shortish, by modern standards, bouncy, narrow course, and so we took the view, and I thought it was one occasion where selectors really did make a difference. I thought we played a bit of a blinder. I mean, selectors normally get criticised, but I thought we did the right thing in that we left out people that were better players than we picked.
Did you pick them for the golf course?
We picked them for the golf course and for the match, the ones that were in form, and also we picked niggly little match players, of whom there were a number, but they weren't actually as good players as some of the people. We left out people like Richard Finch. I'm trying to remember who else we left out. There was Richard Walker, who were better players than some of the ones we picked. But you know what it's like. I mean, there's nothing worse than playing somebody who just keeps...
Those guys you don't want to play.
Up and down. And we picked half a dozen of them. And sure enough, we won the match, against all the odds, because they had a strong team. Yeah,
I remember thinking it was ridiculous that you'd won that.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know how we did it, really, but we did. And they did all the right kind of things, and... chipped and putted our way to victory.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you about captaincy. I mean, you've been in, there's much is made of captaincy, certainly at Ryder Cup level these days. I mean, Paul McGinley changed the way it was done, really, 7-8 years ago at Gleneagles. It's now become, there's two sides of the coin. There's some people think, captaincy is really, really important, and others think, well, it doesn't matter at all. Where do you sit in that, having been captained and been a captain?
Yeah, well, my approach to captaincy really was to try and not make the mistakes that previous captains I'd played under. I mean, I thought that was my main motivation. I think there's...
And what were those mistakes?
I think there are certain practical things you have to be. I mean, you need to know everything that's going on. Everybody needs to know when they're going to be playing, what the uniform is. All those sort of real bread and butter type things they need to know. I think it's quite an important role with the press, and I think you need to be the one that takes the blame. You need to be. It's never your player's fault. You've got to be the one. I mean, I'd get it from when I was made captain. I was travelling quite a lot, so I used to go into Smiths at airports, and get these sort of leadership books. A lot of them were military, and just read them, So I just read a lot, and a lot of the stuff was very common. It's all common sense, like everything, really. So you don't want to be a pain in the neck. You need to know all the things that you do. You need to be the one that takes the stick and takes the flak, basically. I mean, I remember even when we won at Nairn, after the first day when we were losing, going into the press tent and getting
well, you kept dropping Scottish people. That was your problem.
No, not the first day. I didn't. I got flack for because I said we got a great team, because I was trying to build them up, obviously. And then we were losing 7-5, and they were going, well, it's just the same as ever. And you've left 2 of the 3 Scots out all day tomorrow. What are you thinking, type thing. That was actually that was a bit of an issue, really. But unfortunately, it was Lauren Kelly and David Patrick, and both of them had lost their games. And I was very conscious of the fact that here we are in, north of Scotland with 3 Scots, and I'm leaving 2 of them out all day. And it was the reason I put Graham Rankin up first, which I suppose part of me was putting him in there because he hadn't scored a point in Walker Cup up to that point. But he was talented, Graham, and so I put him there and told him that, I wanted him to lead from the front because, he had to bring the Scottish crowd with him. And it really worked. Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure that 100% expected it, but it did work, And so you learn something, that actually all he needed was a pat in the back, really, instead of everybody getting at him all the time.
Yeah. And what's your theories on partnerships and order of play and that kind of thing.
Well, partnerships, I think, are the easiest thing in the world. I just don't understand why the pro game don't do it more. The first thing I do when we're out in our first practice rounds, I go to everybody confidentially and say, who would you like to play with and who would you not like to play with? Because I don't think there's anybody better to play with in a foursome, or a four-ball, come to that, than the person you want to. And in every occasion, that's been my partnerships. I've never had a problem. You know, don't put them with people they don't want to play with, and do put them with people you do want to play with, and that's it.
Yeah.
And
what about style of play doesn't come into it, or length off the tee?
No, because they've all thought about that.
Yeah.
You know, they only want to... Nobody wants to play with somebody that they don't think they're going to win with.
Yeah.
And then for the singles order, all you had to do was go to Gary and say...
this is Gary Wilson.
Gary Wilson, yeah. Say, give me a list, an order of people that you'd like to play with in the foursomes, and that is your order of, of best players, because all he cared about was winning a point. So he'd go look down at Paul Casey, or whatever, whatever the order was, and then you know what your best players are. But to me, it's the obvious thing to do. You know, you just put people with who they want to play with, and it works out. The pieces just fall perfectly. They always do. Because
who did you ever have much people saying guys they didn't want to play with?
It's quite hard to get that information out of people, and you had to push it, and you had to make them understand that this was never going to go any further. But it was an important bit of information, because that you just do not want to put people with people they don't want to play with.
Yeah.
You know?
And he also had a bit of a sense of humour. I mean, I never forget that you telling me years ago that you put Luke Donald with Robert Duck for obvious reasons.
I did, yeah.
Donald and Duck had to play together.
I mean, there's all these good theories about how you do pairings, but when you get a moment like that, you've just got to take it. You can't resist something like that.
Yeah. And so what, did anything go horribly wrong in the midst of all that lack of theorising, if you like?
No, I think my record as a captain, and again, just shows a bit of an obsessive, is very similar to my record as a player. And foursomes, very much, we almost, I won nearly 80% of the matches, so I think I pretty much got that right. But it's, there's nothing clever about it. To me, it's just common sense. It's what a child would do, isn't it?
You can make it as complicated or as simple as you want, yeah.
And I can't believe, when I watch Ryder Cups, just how stupid they are sometimes.
For example?
Well, it's like if you have a 15-point match, so 5 foursomes, like the home international, 5 foursomes, 10 singles, 15-point match, the chances are it's going to be quite close. It's probably going to be 9-6, 8-7, probably. Now you'll get some 10-5s, you might get some 11-4s, but it's generally speaking going to be in that thing. So that means that the end matches are going to be crucial. Singles number 8, 9 and 10 are probably going to be really important.
Yeah.
So the logic of putting all your best players out first, to me, is stupid, So you just flip it over, or, it's not quite as simple as that, but you definitely make sure you've got good players down at the bottom, because it's probably going to depend on them. It's a bit like the football, England playing in the final against Italy, penalties, 5 penalties. Now, it's going to be close. 5 penalties is going to be close. So penalty number 4 and 5, there's going to be an awful lot of pressure on. Probably, it might be a case that it's not happening, but almost certainly that's going to be. So you have your 2 best players taking those penalties. You don't have 2 people who've never taken a penalty before, which is what happened. Mm-hmm. It's just, to me, it's just common sense. You just can't believe they do it. And like America would be losing and put Tiger Woods out last. If you're losing in a 2-day match or a 3-day match like the Ryder Cup, the one thing you've got to do is get back in it and then hope for the best. But you've got to get back in it, so you have your good players. You don't hope that your weaker players are somehow going to get you back in it and then have Tiger Woods irrelevant at the bottom. But it happens time after time after time. But to me, it's just common sense. Again, it's like a child would do it,
Yeah, it's not, as you say, you can make it as straightforward as you like.
Yeah. Well, but I can't. Sometimes I just can't believe how stupid they are. But I mean, just going back to Paul McGinley, I thought was a very good captain.
Mm-hmm, yeah,
and it's hard to predict who's going to be very good and who's not going to be very good, I think.
But what do you make of all the stats that they have nowadays? I mean, I remember asking Harrington in this forum about that, and he leaned more towards instinct than he did stats.
Yeah, well, you can tell how concerned about stats I am. I mean, but I think the stats sort of almost look after themselves if you ask a player who do you want to play with, because they've worked out. You
just know, don't you?
Yeah, they know who they want to play with and why, and it might not be anything to do with how long they are, how straight they are, whatever it was. It might be that they just feel comfortable in their company, and that makes them play well. And that's not something you can ever have a stat for.
No, it's true. It's instinctive.
But it is hard to predict. I mean, like McGinley, who was, better than journeyman, but not at the very top end of the pro game.
He was always in the bottom half of every Ryder Cup team.
Yes, but successful in the Ryder
absolutely.
Cup. And he had evident passion. And I thought he went about it very thorough. I think he's a bright chap.
Yes, yeah.
I thought he went about it. Now, I thought Podrick would be very good too, because he's another bright chap who has passion as well and has really made an incredible career for himself, I think. But he didn't look comfortable to me. I don't know why. It just didn't look like it was something...
Well, maybe he kind of knew that, we're kind of up against it here.
Yeah. I mean, it just didn't look right. Yeah, I mean, I think, look, the main thing was they're miles better than we were. And if we played them 20 times, we'd lose 20 times. I mean, I do think that's the case.
Right now, would it?
Yeah, I think so. Look, maybe we'd win one or two. But, I think that there was quite a big difference. And I think we'd got a few who were getting towards the end of their career, and they hadn't really, they were all...
Dustin Johnson was the oldest player in their team,
Yeah.
and maybe the best player.
Yeah. So, so I think that might have coloured it a bit, but it just didn't seem to suit him. Whereas...
But you're never going to look good when you're getting...
No, that's true. That's true. I mean, that's the main thing. But whereas you see Podrick in his heyday coming down the stretch, having to hold putts, he absolutely looked like he belonged.
For a period, he was a great player.
Yeah, and the gutsy is,
that
PGA one in the States,
he had no business winning that. He'll tell me that himself.
Yeah. Yeah, but he has great qualities, I think.
And he was bright enough to go to Bob Torrance not long after he turned pro, because he had everything that you've touched on earlier, except he couldn't hit the ball well enough.
No, and he's a cutter. He was over the top.
And Bob has made everybody. Bob in his time made everybody hit the ball better.
Yeah.
And that was the only thing Podrick needed.
Yeah. I mean, I remember Podrick as an amateur. He was a very successful amateur because he had almost everything, but
that
as you say,
short game.
But he was a bit over the top of everything, and then that went, and he became what he became.
I wanted to touch on the perks. So you touched on earlier. You won the amateur twice, which is obviously probably the highlight still of your career. The perks of that come with that. I mean, playing the Masters, playing the Open.
Yeah.
Talk to me, particularly about the Masters. I mean,
the Masters. It's a perk to play in it in the first place, but the additional perk, particularly when I played in it, was the draws you got. And that's not quite the same now. You still get to play with a...
Well, I think they've sussed out that the amateur champion is almost always hopeless relative to the people he's playing with.
Yeah. Well, possibly so, but I mean, that was still the case back in the 70s.
But you were better than average. I mean, since then there's been some real duds.
Yeah, but there were rules in those days. I mean, for example, the first year I played in it, John Cook was the US amateur champion, and he was what they call the ranking amateur, and he would play with the defending champion. And John Cook got injured or something, I can't remember. And that meant I became the ranking amateur. So I played with Tom Watson, who was the defending champion. Now, the amateur champion, I think the American amateur champion may still play with...
There is a formula, but I'm not sure what it is.
He still gets a very good draw, but the British amateur champion now plays with Sandy or something, with respect to Sandy, but he's getting on a bit,
That's right.
So the draws were fantastic. I mean, the people I played with, first year I played with Tom Watson. Second round, because they used to change every round in those days. Second round I played with Lee Elder, in the year when Lee Elder, when Lee Elder had been the first black man to play in the Masters. So that was like a fantastic draw. Second year I played in Nicholas. Then third year I played with Sam Snead, which is like even better.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
A
because
legend. Yeah.
because you're playing with some. You know, you've almost covered 100 years.
Well, I made the case in print that you can make a case for Sam Snead being the greatest player in the history of the game because he was great longer than anybody else has been great.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I played with him. He's probably about my age now, actually. He was late 60s. And I was 27 or something, 26, 27. And I was a strong player. I mean, I would, I would have been up with everybody but the very longest. And I had a really good drive off the first tee, I remember. And Snead got up and knocked it past me. You know, and I thought, oh my God. But his putting was shocking. He was also very grumpy.
Was he? Right.
He, I remember introduced myself on the first, in the putting green to him, and we walked from the putting green to the first tee, and a little boy came running across. This is like a man who needs 68 or something, with a pencil and a piece of paper, asking for his autograph, and he just looked down at it and said, "What's that?" And that was it.
Dear.
Walked on, but his putting was shocking.
Yeah.
He was side saddling at the time.
Yeah. Well, give me a summary of those people that you just mentioned. I mean, we're talking, gods of the game there.
Yeah.
What were they like?
Well, Tom Watson was incredibly friendly to play with. His golf was not quite what I expected. At the time, he was hitting quite a big ropey hook. I mean, he actually did the same score. We both did 73s that round. I actually, for years, I thought I'd done 73 and he'd done 74. I was corrected recently. But and when he came in, everybody was going, "Oh, that's fantastic, fantasy, doing the same." I go, well, I know where my scores are going in the next three rounds, and I also know where his scores. And sure enough, he then did 67, 67, 69 to my 75, 76, 77.
Yeah.
So his golf wasn't quite what I expected. His putting was very strong, but he was incredibly friendly. I mean, to the point that we were in the 15th fairway, and he'd asked me what tournaments I was playing in, and of course I was milking everything I could for being amateur champion. So I was going off to the Italian Open, followed by the Dunlop Masters, followed by the Amateur, followed by something else. I was going all over the place, and he said, "You travel more than I do," and he said, "Hang on a minute, I'll just hit this." Literally
in the Masters.
And he hit it onto the green, second shot, and came back and went, "So you're going to 4 different countries?" It was like, but he did. Hang on, I'll just hit this.
Like a monthly medal.
Yeah, he was so talking about the monthly medal. I mean, my real claim to fame in the Masters was in the first year, where I made the cut, because I'd gone over 10 days early, and I made the cut because I'd got used to the greens and stuff like that. But last round, I drew Dick Sidoroff, very good player.
Yes, I know Dick.
Very good player at the time, particularly. But to say that myself and Dick Sidoroff were an unattractive pairing in the last round of the Masters is an understatement.
Yeah.
So we actually played, because we were out, whatever time we were out, but when we got to Amen Corner, all the leaders were going out off the first tee. So because there's not many stands at Augusta, everybody's up near the top, near the first tee. So we played Amen Corner with nobody watching in the last round of the Masters.
Right?
Nobody. I mean, nobody. There was a bloke, with 2 of us, 2 caddies.
That's pretty good.
There was a bloke picking litter up, but I didn't count him.
No.
And nobody watching, because everybody's up in the first tee. So that's my real claim to fame.
Yeah.
Nicholas...
not many people be able to say that.
But that, I mean, it was like...
Just you and Dick.
Yeah, but you said it was like the monthly medal. It genuinely was. You had to slap yourself. In fact, I remember Dick Sidoroff urging me on, going, "No, come on," because I was getting a bit down on myself for some reason, and he was going, "Come on," because you couldn't lift yourself really. Nicholas was, as a golfer, a different level altogether. I felt from pretty much everybody else I ever played with, to be honest. Again, friendly though. I mean, I actually found the better the player, the friendlier they were really. So he was nice. I played with him in the Open as well. He was nice to play with.
who wasn't? Give me the other side of that coin. Who disappointed you? Not just as a player.
Funnily enough, the ones that disappointed me would have been the more journeyman pros that slightly... See, I'm a bit reluctant to actually mention his name here. But I played in the...
nobody listens to this podcast.
No, I dare say, but I still don't think it's... I'm not going to mention his name.
You can tell me afterwards.
Yeah, I'll tell you afterwards. But it was a British Ryder Cup player, and I played in the Dunlop Masters at Saint Pierre, 1978-ish, something like that. And in those days... pros were allowed to tap down spike marks and amateurs weren't. There was a strange thing that was happening at the time. Anyway, I did well. I was 68, 72 or something, first 2 rounds, doing quite well, and then drew this player who reported me after the 3rd round for tapping down spike marks. Said I shouldn't have been allowed to do it because I was an amateur. Right. And I thought, oh, God.
It wasn't as if you were going to take any money at the end of the week.
Well, I know, but surely we're all playing under the same rules, and I thought, I mean,
were you penalised?
No, the officials laughed at it, because it was the rules of the tournament. It wasn't, but amateurs in an amateur tournament weren't allowed to tap down spike marks, and but pros were. It was a strange thing. So I found that the really good players, to whom I was no threat, were very friendly. But the sort of journeyman who I would have thought I was as good as, they were less pleasant.
Well, I was going to ask you that, actually. I mean, my view of you is that you would have scraped into a Ryder Cup team.
Yes, I think I would have done. I think that was the sort of standard I was. I'd have done something one year to just about make it. But I'm not 100% certain how fantastic a life that is.
Well, yeah.
I mean, if you're that kind of player, because almost the worst standard of player I think you can be is good enough to hang on to your card, but just having a miserable time the whole time. Yeah. Just about having enough money.
The ones I feel sorry for as well in that is the guys that I played it with and against that were turned pro and they weren't quite good enough.
I know.
They were close.
Yeah, but
I've had people say to me, I mean, ridiculously, not really knowing how good I was. I mean, I wasn't even close to being that. So I've got no regrets. But the people I feel sorry for are the ones who were just on the edge of being good enough and not quite.
Yeah, but those are the ones that just about keep their cards. They're missing the cut.
That's what I mean.
2/3 of the time.
Yeah.
And I think that's a miserable life.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But I think you get. There's so much coaching going on nowadays. With in national bodies and stuff like that. And I've been saying to the England golf, for example, you want to get, because most people turning pro, the vast majority of them are not going to be successful and they're going to be struggling. And Mark Mouland, been a pro for, I don't know, he's played thousands of pro tournaments and he's all over the world. He's always out in the Far East and stuff like that. I say, you want to get him in to consult with these players because that's what they're going to be. They're going to be, what do you do, Mark, when you've missed the cut in the Singapore Open and you're playing in the Indian Open next week and you haven't got a flight? What do you do?
Exactly.
Because he'd be like a world expert in that. I mean, if you couldn't, Nicholas wouldn't have a clue.
No.
But Mark Mouland would. And really, it's been a bit more practical about what because all these kids that are now turning pro that are not going to make it.
Yeah. Well, the trouble is, how do you view the fact that they've got so many places to play when they do turn pro? At lower levels, the Euro Pro Tour and Alps Tour and. There's one in Germany. There any number of places to play in it.
The whole thing's been conspired together, hasn't it? Where the rules of amateur status. I mean, I'm really pleased to see them freeing up. I think that will help a lot. I think they've been brave to have gone as far as they have, and they've slightly surprised me as well. But I think that's going to be a good thing because up until now the rules were. Basically, if you want to be an international golfer, you've got to be full-time because the standard is such that you've got to be full-time. Yeah. So you've got to be a full-time golfer, but you can't have any money. Now, if you can think of a better way of pushing people into the pro game than that. I don't know. I don't think there is one. I mean, I think that's the most unsustainable position you could ever have taken.
Yeah.
You've got to be full-time. You can't have any money. So everybody's been pushed into the pro game. And, of course, the commercial world react to it. That's why all these tours are there now. Because there's so many players, and they've all got to be... they've all got to be soaked up somehow. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't mean anything. I mean, they're not... To me, a pro golfer, the only role that they perform is as an entertainer. They perform no other role at all.
Yeah.
So they're entertainers. Now, if you're playing in the Alps tour with nobody watching, you're not an entertainer.
No.
So you're not a pro golfer.
Yeah.
I mean, you might pretend you're a pro golfer, but you're not. Unless you're on...
It's a good point.
They're not pro golfers. They're just non-amateurs because of the rules of amateur golf were so strict. I mean, I've made myself very unpopular by nagging about the rules of amateur status for many, many years. Because I always thought the best way of doing it was to define a pro and everybody else is just a player. So don't define an amateur, it's just too difficult. And don't worry about money, because there's never going to be any anyway.
Yeah. Plus, we're all breaking the rules anyway. I mean, you and I used to go to Ireland every year and play in the tournament at Carlow. I mean, I got my flights paid for. They put us up, they fed us and watered us.
And that's
just a very small example.
And it's got much, much worse. And one of the reasons that I think they've freed up or are going to free up the rules of amateur status is because if you're a very good player, playing for a college in America or playing in a national squad in Europe, you're getting all these benefits anyhow. But if you're not so good, you can't have the benefits. Now, there's no reason why there should be one level of allowance for an amateur player, and then if you're not quite so good, you can't have any of it. So they're saying you can have it. Everybody can have those benefits now. But yes, that's right. I mean, there was, so, but it did push everybody into the pro game. I mean, the fact that it was a struggle. And also just the way golf works, it's, if you're quite a good player playing around your home course, you go around in 67 and you pick up the paper and you see that Tiger's gone around in 67 at the Blue Doral or something, and the Blue Monster Doral, and you make a comparison. And also, everybody's good shot's good enough. If you hit a 5-iron purely to a foot, there's nobody else can do a better shot than that. That is as good. So everybody makes a false term of reference. Whereas, in tennis or something, if you play Andy Murray at his best, it's pretty obvious that you can't compete. You
couldn't. I mean, I used to play squash when I worked at Golf Digest in America. I played squash at lunchtimes a lot with the guy Dave Higdon. His name was, and he was a good tennis player, good college level tennis player, really good player. Yeah. And I used to just beat him at squash, but he used to always say, "Well, if we're going to play tennis," he said, "you won't even touch the ball." No. And I said, yeah. So we went out, and he served to me, and he was right. Yeah. I couldn't touch it. No. And he was 4 levels down from Andy Murray.
Yeah.
So.
Well, squash is a good example, actually, of a sport. If you're a little bit better than somebody, you win everything, But it's because you have to return a better player's shots. When in golf, you don't. So you get this false term of reference. So that's another thing that conspires to get everybody turning pro. And you've got, the amateur game is only left with, what used to be youth golf. That's all it is now, really. In fact, I'd even go further. I don't think there is an amateur game anymore. I think there's a pre-pro game. But the idea that you could have somebody with a job, an accountant or something, living.
Well, I used to work in the bank when I was playing. Nobody's doing that anymore.
No, those people don't exist. In fact, the only people that can't play in the amateur championship now are amateurs. Because everybody else is on a national squad or something. They're all 20.
It's lost a bit of its romance, hasn't it? Yeah.
Well, the idea that you'd get, I don't know. Do you remember Reg Glading?
Yes, of course.
He'd only ever play in things that were in the southeast of England, sort of.
He's the guy that fell down the bunker at St George's. The big bunker.
And Craig Lawrence, I think it was, that he was playing. Goes, does that mean it's my hole? And he's lying there with a broken leg.
I know.
But. Somebody like him, age 50, would enter. He was a good player. He never moved out and he'd get to the semi-finals or something, and there would be a real local interest.
Yeah.
That's all gone now.
Where do you stand on the ongoing debate on the equipment's part of it? But are the players now better than the Nicklaus generation, Watson,
Yeah.
Or is it just because of the equipment?
Well, I think they are.
Where do you
better.
stand on that?
I think they are better. I'll tell you where I really notice it is iron shots from bunkers, long bunkers,
Yeah.
180-yard bunker shot. Now, we all know how hard, occasionally you get a really good one, but, a lot of the time you wouldn't, I just never see anybody, they go in a bunker now and they always hit it onto the green.
But then you're watching the players at the top of the leaderboard playing their best as well.
Sure, but it's one thing, I do think, look, in every sport people get better, so there's no reason to think that golf wouldn't. It's compounded by the fact that equipment's made it easier.
It's hard to compare, that's what I find.
It is hard to compare. Look, I blame myself slightly because I was on the Equipment Standards Committee for 4 years, where we looked into all this sort of stuff, and it was right at the time where they're changing the grooves.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't go anywhere near far enough. The idea was, everybody's spinning the ball so much, but they still are really, it's not any, well, it's probably a little bit different, but it's certainly not different enough. But the real killer was metal woods, I think. That was when the game changed.
Well, I always feel, and I think I've mentioned this before on somewhere, maybe on a podcast, but guys like Nicholas Colsaerts from Belgium, magnificent long iron player, and gets really no benefit from that whatsoever.
No,
because everybody can hit their hybrids like he can hit his long irons.
Yeah, but the middle bit of the game's gone as well. You go back now. You are in danger of sounding like an old fart here.
Yeah, I've been accused of that.
Yeah. But, you go back to the 60s and 70s and you'd got people who'd reputation. You were talking about Neil Coles earlier before we started chatting. Beautiful iron players, just that doesn't exist anymore because you thrash it off the tee as hard as you possibly can and then you find it and then you hit some kind of lofted iron, even on 500-yard long par fours. And then who's got the best short game? And the middle bit, the Lee Trevino hitting the fade in with a 4-iron and somebody, that's all, it's almost gone. I mean, I know they hit. I mean, I'm involved in golf course design now. If you're now wanting to get somebody to hit a long shot into a green for a par, not for a par 5, but you can only really do it with a par 3.
Yeah.
You can't do it with par 4 anymore, not for top players, because a 500-yard hole, Rory carries it 320, runs as much as it runs, so 20 yards, say 3/4, 160 yards, a wedge or a 9-iron. That's a 500-yard,
Well, let me rephrase my question then. Is the game better now than it was back then?
Well, I think,
or is it not?
I think it's a lesser game. I think. But then again, that's old fart talking because, you do get youngsters now think that hitting the ball miles is the thrill of it, And I think the tours think that. I think that they...
the game's been dumbed down a bit at that level.
They are resistant to any changes which the USGA and the RNA might make because they believe that the thing that keeps viewing figures up and therefore...
money coming
in is people hitting the ball a long way, and DeChambeau being a really good example of it, but Tiger Woods in his day as well, is another example of it. But it does make it very one-dimensional, and I personally think the game is much more one-dimensional than it used to be.
At that level,
yeah, it is, and there aren't the same. You used to get the Gary players and Manuel Pineros and Bernard Gallagher to a lesser extent, who won using different skills. It's which bomber is putting well this week is basically...
I was arguing, I've said this a million times, but I'm going to say it again, that, how can the game be better if nobody plays like Seve or Lee Trevino?
Yeah, I know. But basically, the winner is which bomber is putting well this week. That's all it really is boiled down to. So I think it's got very one-dimensional. And I'm all for... trying to, I think it's very hard to do to wind back, but I would welcome it if they could do it. But, there are many considerations. There are the tours to consider, equipment manufacturers who've invested so much money within the rules, you've got to consider them. But, I think the USGA and the RNA should be on a higher plane. They should be talking about making the game, keeping the game as it was, with every aspect of it, with artistry and the iron play being part of it. Doesn't, but it hasn't worked out so far. I mean, cricket's the one, where the aluminium bat was brought in.
Baseball, they banned the metal bats as well.
Yeah, but the aluminium bat was played in the morning and then banned at lunchtime, and that was it. Mm-hmm. Never used it.
The same with the javelin. They had to restrict the javelin because they were starting to throw it. It was getting dangerous.
Yeah.
So they just made it heavier or whatever to make sure they couldn't throw it as far. Yeah. I mean, that's always the thing that perplexes me about golf is that we screw around with the venues to fix it, to save the equipment rather than the other way around.
And of course, some venues have gone, because they're just too short.
Sunningdale's the classic example.
Yeah, Sunningdale, but Ganton I mentioned earlier, Prestwick.
Yeah,
well, Prestwick maybe for other reasons as well, but they're just too short. I mean, we're doing some.
I was going to ask you about your course design.
Yeah.
Just your overall kind of philosophy of that before you get into it.
Well, I mean, my most interesting project at the moment is Druids Glen, which is going to be remodelled next year, which we're doing. 7,000 yards long. They would like it to be an Irish Open course again. 7,000 yards is just not long enough.
No.
So we've got to find 300 or 400 yards. Now, Druids Glen, I think, is 30-odd years old, 32 years old or something. 7,000 yards 32 years ago was long enough. But now you've got to be 7,400 yards. Mm-hmm. I mean, where are we going to be in 30 years' time?
I do wonder where they're going to play. I really do.
But, I mean, great venues, are being lost to the game.
And which makes no sense to me. I don't get that.
No. But look, it's. I mean, I've been on the committees. I've seen the threats from industry. Yeah. You can see it from their point of view as well, and you can see it from the pros' point of view, because at the end of the day, if you're a pro organisation, bringing money in is what you do.
Yeah, they're a business.
That's what you do. So, why would you want to, have an altruistic view of things when it's going to maybe hurt you? So that's why they think like they think.
But they are going to run out of places to play. They are.
Yeah. And of course, the other thing then is everything takes longer as well. Yeah. Because you're having to walk so far.
So what's your brief then when you go in and design or redesign or fix or whatever?
They're all different. I mean, but most of your work is related to equipment. It's moving bunkers, it's moving tees back, trying to find extra length. Everybody's carrying over the bunkers. So it's all related, and it's been great for golf course designers because. There is all this work that otherwise wouldn't have been there.
Well, there's a lot of redos.
So there's another body there that, have a strong vested interest in the thing continuing, really. Not that they would say that, but, that they're still getting work because of it.
Yeah.
So the practical manifestations are, I think, if you go back to the 30s, cross bunkering and cross heather was quite a popular thing, and then it went out of fashion for some reason. But I can see that coming back because
places like Walton Heath have that.
Yeah, that's right. But I can see it coming back because you've got to make just bombing it miles down the fairway. How do you stop that? Just put in cross penalty across is one way of doing it. You can't grow rough up. People think about growing rough up, but in the end of the day, it affects the pace of play.
And if you do that, you end up everybody plays the hole the same way. I mean, I remember playing the Pro-Am at Wentworth, the first time they changed Wentworth, 2010. It was just before Graham McDowell won the US Open, and I played with him in the Pro-Am. And we walked off the 18th green, which has been modified again since then. But I remember saying, a terrible hole, Graham. And he goes, well, what do you mean? I said, you're Graham McDowell, and I'm me, and we just played that hole in exactly the same way. 3-wood, 6-iron wedge. And he thought about it for a minute. He goes, yeah, you're right. He says, I shouldn't be playing the hole the same way as you. And I said, yeah.
That's nice.
Well, it's true. It was true, though. Absolutely true. I mean, and it's nonsense.
Yeah.
That's what you end up with. That's the problem.
Well, there's that. Or, people go, well, make the penalty for being errant worse by growing rough up. But then that has such an adverse effect on pace of play for, the club player who's losing balls and they hate it. So that's too simplistic. I think cross penalties will come back in a bit more. And par threes are the only other way you can do it. We've just done a few holes out in Woodbrook Golf Club in south of Dublin. We've got a par 3. Now, this won't be used by the members much, but it's got a tee in at 247 yards. Because if ever you get a big tournament there and you want somebody to hit a long iron, I mean, it might even only be a 4-iron for them or whatever it might be, but it's the only way you can do it. You can't do it with a par 4. So
where does it end then, Peter?
Well, I think it's up to the governance of the game, and there will be a fight because you've got equipment manufacturers in the pro game who are the ones with all the attention, who don't want it. And it's hard. I mean, you saw the reaction of Mickelson to the length of the driver. I mean, he's slagging off.
And that's nonsense. I mean, who cares about that?
I know.
That's nibbling at the edges.
I know, but he's slagging off amateurs making rules and stuff,
But that's a prevailing view amongst the pros.
Yeah, it will be.
A lot of them.
It will be, because it becomes us and them. But in fairness to the R&A, and the rules people, they do consult very thoroughly because they're very aware of all the cases made. I mean, you turn up for a committee meeting, there's a pile of letters from solicitors saying don't even think about it, So it's...
Well, that's the worry, of course.
Well, but everybody's very conscious of it. But at the same time, you're there to protect the game.
Yeah, I mean, I get a bit impatient with it all. I mean, it's taken forever, it seems like to me. But I do have a certain sympathy with the RNA and the USGA because they've got to cover every base, as you just said, and they've got to get to the point where their lawyer can stand up in the courtroom and say, we've done everything we can before we got to this point.
Yeah.
Because if there's if they've missed something, it will be pounced on in the court. And
I actually think they're very good. It's why things take so long. All this consultation and stuff, which is still going on with the ball going too far. But the noises coming out, particularly out of the USGA recently, have been quite bullish. Mm-hmm. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. But just drawing a line in the sand. The trouble is, if you draw a line in the sand, but people continue to get bigger and stronger,
well, that I get that. I mean, I don't think there's anything you can do about that.
Well, except for the javelin example, where you have to bring it back because they're getting bigger and strong. You have to bring it back. So, in order to retain, the skill level of the game, you may have to bring it back, but you're going to get so much resistance to that. So I don't know. I mean, it's a real problem with the game, I think.
We're getting close to the end here. I want to go back to you mentioned it, the Open in 1979, when you were close to the lead near the end. I want you to try and describe what that felt like, and and did you think, oh my God, what am I doing?
I did, absolutely. I think I was lying 12th going out. And I was playing with Bill Longmuir, who'd led after
Lovely
the first
guy.
round.
Yeah.
Very nice chap and very good-looking lad at the time.
Mr. Basildon, he was back in the day.
Oh, was he? Right.
Yeah.
And he and there were a load of girls that had T-shirts following him and stuff.
You sure it was him and not you?
I'm pretty certain it was him. But anyway, off we went. Anyway, it was really windy. And I played well, and I was out and about level par. Par the 10th, I remember, and a good drive down the 11th, and the 11th, which is par 5, was a driver off the fairway and a full 9-iron, give you an idea of the strength of the wind.
Yeah.
So as I stood over my 9-iron, somebody from the stands shouted, "Come on, Peter, you've got a chance." And I genuinely hadn't even considered it.
Right.
And I went back, and there was one of those big yellow scoreboards, and I looked up, and I was lying 4th, 4 shots behind. Yeah. But the people who were ahead of me hadn't played as many holes.
Yeah.
And this was a day where you were dropping shots rather than gaining shots. And I hadn't given it a thought. I really hadn't given it a thought, but I was now giving it a thought. And I hit a beautiful shot straight at the flag, which was over a bunker. Hit the top of the bunker, dropped back in, took 6. Yeah. Dropped a shot at the next. Missed for a short putt for a birdie on the 13th. And then got plugged under a bunker.
It's over at that point. Then.
After a good second shot, which didn't come off the wind on the 14th. Yeah. And suddenly I dropped, whatever that was, 4 shots. And I'd gone from 4th to, I don't know, 14th or 15th, something like that. Now, if that was the Lytham Trophy, I'd have gone from leading to one shot behind, and I'd still be fine. But at that level, and these weren't bad mistakes; they were just little mistakes. I mean, the one the plugged was a bad one, but there were little mistakes which anybody could have made, and one was for a birdie, But there's just a rush of people go past you, Christ, and then you're just back in the pack again,
How did you reflect on that afterwards? Did you think, well, thank goodness I didn't turn pro? I'm not, did it make you think you weren't as good as you thought you were, or what did it make you think?
I think over time you sort of. At the time, I thought I was a bit unlucky, particularly when I got plugged. I thought I was a bit unlucky. But actually, over time, I realised that, the more you practice, the luckier you get. Yeah. And I think, look, I have no regrets about not turning pro at all, because I think I would have been journeymanish with a couple of good years and maybe sneaking in a Ryder Cup team and that. But I don't think that would have made.
You wouldn't have enjoyed it, would you?
I don't think it would have made a happy life. I'm not a natural traveller. I don't particularly like. I hate it. In fact, I flew for the first time in about 18 months, a couple of weeks back, because I've been going over in the boat to Ireland, work in Ireland, and I like the boat. But I go to an airport, immediately I hate it. I just don't like it at all.
Yeah. But plus, it's one way of avoiding the A77 to Stranraer. I mean, let's face it.
I know, but there's a new bypass at Mabel.
Is there?
Well, it's not open yet, but nearly open. So that'll help.
Well, we might go back to Turnberry then. Finally, that was the last thing I wanted to talk to you about was when you and I set this podcast up, you mentioned your meeting with Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Pre-presidency, I think it was.
Pre-presidency. Just pre-presidency.
And you had the audacity to tell me that you quite liked him, and you kind of felt a fondness for Donald, which is a rare thing these days.
Well, I had a long meeting with him, a couple of hours, and it was all about golf, because he was wanting to synchronise his. I think he's got 16 resort type places, Doral and Turnberry and Doonbeg and stuff like that. He's wanted to sort of synchronise them, and that's sort of work I have done in the past. So anyway, we got talking. He was just remodelling the course at the time, and Martin Ebert was there, and his son. What's his son's name again?
Doesn't matter.
Anyway, he was there, and it's fascinating. It's a fascinating thing because it wasn't at all what I expected. I expected a very sort of bombastic, what you see on the telly type thing.
Yeah.
Asks questions. I mean, I would say in a 2-hour meeting, I did 80% of the talking, which I would have thought would have been the other way around.
Yeah.
His lawyer was there, a chap called George Sorial as well. Incredibly knowledgeable about golf. I mean, and interested in every aspect of it.
Right.
We had to, at one point, he was doing up the hotel as well at the time, so we had to go and check the ballroom or something. And I remember walking down the corridor with him because he said, come and we'll keep talking while we're walking. And he was reflecting on the price of everything, and he knew the price of everything. I mean, this is a man who'd got, this empire.
Yeah.
And he knew everything. And I remember talking to his lawyer afterwards, and he said, well, you've just seen what that meeting's like now, and I've got these notes, because he sits there taking notes, and he's got 40 points. He said, we'll now come back here in 3 months' time. He makes no notes at all. And he'll remember every single thing, and he'll ask me whether they've all been done. He says, it's unbelievable. And he does this every week. He's got like amazing memory. Just not the person I thought. But he was so, in the end of the day, he was so Scottish.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, of course he is half Scottish.
He is half Scottish. With an American accent. He was Scottish, but you sort of forget the accent after a while. And you just look at this bloke, and he just seems so Scottish and so into Scotland as well. Really very. So he wasn't the bloke I expected at all. He was extremely impressive.
Well, given that, I mean, why do you think he behaved the way he did in so many different ways outside that room?
Well, he's a bit of a showman, isn't he? I mean, like I was thinking about it. Has there ever been a more successful American? Because he's made fortunes as a businessman. He's got to the top of show business and then become president. Has anybody else ever approached that level of
success? It's hard to
success?
imagine anybody more famous in the world.
No, but, well, yeah, that's right. But, you know, it's a heck of a lot of things to have been very successful. And I don't think you achieve that level of success by being a bit of a shrinking violet, really. You know, and of course it comes across as, I mean, a lot of people hate him, but a lot of people love him. You know, it's a near 50-50 job, isn't it? Yeah. But he wasn't the person I expected. And I think I got a bit of affinity for him because...
would you vote for him?
I'd certainly never disclose that. But because of his Scottishness.
Right.
Because I felt... You see, I get slightly... Because I feel a real 50-50 job, you know. Born in London, played for England, lived in England for 50-odd years, but heart and roots in Scotland. And I'm a real 50-50 job. And I really struggle with it sometimes, you know. You know, where do your affinities lie and something? And I felt
Who do you cheer for in the England-Scotland matches?
It changes. It changes. Rugby, it's England. Football, it's Scotland. Which is very odd. I mean, if it's England-Scotland football, I'm as Scottish as I can be. And if it's England-Scotland rugby, I'm as English as it can be. That's really weird. I mean, I know, but it's just the way it's broken.
Yeah, well, I remember asking you years and years ago why you weren't playing for us. You never really were able to explain it, I don't think.
No, it was simple because when I got to sort of scratch when I was 18 or whatever, and all my friends entered, the English amateur was at Burnham and Barrow. We were quite close, relatively close to where I lived, and they were all entering it. So I entered it, and I was qualified because I was born in London. And at that stage, I wasn't thinking I'm going to play for England or anything like that because I was more interested in rugby, really. Yeah. But that was it. In those days, once you'd played in the English Championship, that was it. So then, as I got a bit better,
although it's not universal. I mean, we were talking earlier. I mean, I'm going to expose Peter Dawson, the former RNA secretary here, because he claims to be Scottish, but he played in the English amateur back in the day.
I know.
Well, you can't have it both ways.
Well, Sandy Lowell was my first partner for England.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, then became a sort of legendary Scot.
Yes, but there was nothing but Scottish blood in him.
No, that's true. And Gordon Brand was
the same.
Well, he played for Scotland, actually. Yeah,
but he had to. He was born in Scotland.
All right.
So he
could
play.
They hadn't got the choice. Yeah. But I mean, he was Bristolian, you know.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
Listen to him, you know. Yeah.
Ken Brown was another one.
He didn't play it.
He played for England boys.
Boys, yeah, he might have done, yeah. But it's a mess at sort of pro level nowadays with other sports. You know, it's just ridiculous. Just ridiculous. I mean, Scotland actually are one of the worst for rugby. They had.
We've got if your granddad was born somewhere or flew over Scotland once,
in the 28-man squad for the last Six Nations, there were 18 people born outside of Scotland. Now, I mean, born outside doesn't mean everything, but all you need is a grandparent.
Yeah. Right. Anyway, I'm going to ask you one last question, Peter, before we finish. In the midst of all this, all the things that you've done, one thing that you're most proud of, the highlight, what would it be?
I think it would be winning the individual in the Eisner Trophy.
More than the amateur?
Yeah. Because I thought it was hard. And I remember it was in Sweden, 1989. And... we were out late. Owen O'Connell and myself, we were out late. I remember walking around Stockholm with him, just so nervous because we knew we were in with a chance of winning. But it was massive crowds. I mean, real pro 20,000 people there. Right. We were playing with Sweden in the final. There was a lot of pressure on, and you were playing. I mean, whereas I like my individual successes, you know, but you were playing for you because the Eisner Trophy is the team, really. And I just remember. As much pressure as I've ever felt. Windy day, nasty course with water everywhere, and surviving it and winning well in the end. That was where I came off feeling that's about as good as I can do. That's about as well as I can play, and as good as an achievement as I can do. I would say that was probably my. It's that or winning the Warwickshire Boys.
Well, obviously the Warwickshire Boys is a major.
Warwickshire Boys was they were Andrew Carman in the field. You remember Andrew?
Yeah, I do.
Pip Elson, do you remember him?
Yes, he turned pro. He
so
Rookie of the Year one year.
Yeah, so it was a pretty impressive
something
field.
something to be proud of.
Yeah.
And on that note, thank you for your time, Peter.
Okay.
It's been great talking to you.
All right, John, thank you.
Yes, some genuinely fascinating insights there into all aspects from the game from somebody who has held some pretty privileged positions. I hope you enjoyed that chat and that you've made the effort to follow the show on your preferred podcast app. We release episodes every 2 weeks, and that's the best way to make sure that you don't miss any. That's it for episode 55, and I look forward to your company again in 2 weeks' time for episode 56 of The Thing About Golf.